Hello everyone, I'm Yusuf Jalali and this is Face to Face. After 11 days of deadly fighting between Israel and the Palestinian resistance movements, the two sides now agreed to a ceasefire which came into force on Friday. But to the Palestinian people, it's more fire, but a victory against a regime that is armed to the teeth. But it's interesting that the Israeli regime is also regarding the ceasefire as a victory. Now, who's the real victor? Now, I'm joined by Nasser Abu-Sharif, who is the representative of the Islamic Jihad movement in Iran. Welcome to the show. Ahlan wa sahlan, Ustad Nasser.
Hello to you and our dear brothers and sisters who are watching this show.
The fact that why Palestinians are joyful after the ceasefire, why they are celebrating the ceasefire as a victory while they're losing, they have lost 240 people, while the Israeli regime has lost only 12 people, almost 12 people.
Of course, we know about the equation historical Palestine, and to us, since 1917 up until now, the Israeli regime is seizing and exploiting our rights in Palestine. We made great achievements against this big enemy, the Zionist regime, and it's not only the Zionist regime, but those who support this regime. So during this Gaza war, the United States funneled $730 million in the form of bombs and missiles to aid Israel. The Zionist regime acquired $3.9 billion just to enhance its military prowess. This just to enhance its military capabilities. So we as oppressed nation, we stand against this Zionist regime and against the United States, not just only against the Zionist regime. If the Zionist regime was standing alone against us, we would have defeated it and even bigger enemies. So we have taken great strides in the recent onslaught against our people. So during the past years, they tried to ignore the Palestinian cause and destroy our rights based on the so-called deal of the century. Donald Trump thought in vain that they can, of course, push the Palestinian cause into oblivion using his idiot plan. So such a great cause cannot be ignored and swept under the rug by such plans. Donald Trump forced some of the Arab nations into normalizing with Israel. As I said, the Palestinian cause was pushed into oblivion completely. A big victory against a cruel and savage regime that has all of the supports from some of the Western countries. So we revived the Palestinian cause once again, and this cause cannot be erased from the memory of the world. So we shed light on racial discriminations and ethnic cleansing committed and the horrible crimes committed by the Israeli regime against our people, all of the arrests and the denial of rights to return. We have currently we have 2 million people who are living outside our lands and are denied the right to return. West Bank is now under the control of the Israeli regime. So now we're trying to raise awareness about all these crimes committed by the Israeli regime and the racial discrimination committed by Israel. So you cannot just sit on your hands when you see all of these being committed on a daily basis by a savage regime. So now the Gaza Strip has been blockaded and is denied access to the world through sea, air, and land. But despite all these pressures and all of the siege imposed against the blockaded Gaza Strip, the Gaza Strip responded firmly and crushingly, and this is unprecedented against Israel. This is a victory and a great achievement against Israel. Why should the Israeli victory, while we tarnished the image of its army in this fighting? It built a country by using an army, but we destroyed the image of the army during the latest fight with their forces. And this regime tries to face you with all of its power and with all of the support that it receives from its Western friends, but we stood against it, and we took the fight inside its lands, inside its capital. So the Zionist dream is beginning to collapse. The Israelis are now thinking about leaving Israel and resort to other countries. Why do you think that the Israeli airport was closed during the onslaught against the Gaza Strip? It's not just to secure the security of its people, but to ban its people from leaving and exiting its lands. So what we showed during the latest confrontation was that the Israeli dream cannot be fulfilled and cannot be materialized.
If we have a little flashback to the past, we have had 3 intifada or popular uprisings in Palestine where we see people responding to weapons by throwing stones. Now, the resistance movements in Palestine are responding to weapons by rockets. So how this achievement has been made?
The Palestinian nation is creative. It does not rely on weapons, but we rely on our rights, our absolute right. The world knows it very well. In 1948, there was a resolution issued by the United Nations, Resolution 194. Right to return. But this means that the world, even the United Nations, is now admitting our rights. We have history, we have rich civilization. We have a history of 5,000 years, and it cannot be ignored. So we trust our rights and rely on our rights, and nobody can stand the violations of our rights. The UK also occupied
هذا عدد مهول لا يتصور. الهند لم تحتلها بهذا العدد.
And India and no other nation was occupied to such an extent, neither India nor any other nation in history. So 317,000 soldiers were deployed. It is unbelievable. This is an unbelievable number. And there was this Jewish author who wrote a book, and he was Jewish, but he admitted the cruelties and the occupation that is Israel. We are living in a country that is worse than South Africa before the victory of Nelson Mandela's revolution. And the world is watching now, and everybody knows about who is right and who's wrong. And this right was the major drive for us Palestinians to stand against the occupation and the cruelties exercised by Israel. And the Palestinian nation has taken its issues at its own hands and should not rely on any other external force to achieve its goals and get to its own rights. Of course, there was an intifada where Palestinians used weapons against Israelis, and Israel of course withdrew from its positions, and we forced them to withdraw from their positions. But this latest one is really unprecedented, and now that we see some of the Arab people and Arab of course governments are committing against the Palestinian people by returning to diplomacy with Israel. We, of course, are relying on our own power, but the entire world this time is standing behind us and supporting us, and this is a great development. The entire world is now acknowledging our resistance and are denouncing the 1948 occupation of Palestinians. And this, during the 1948 evictions, during the evictions, 113 days, during 113 days, a great number of Palestinians were evicted out of their lands. And this definitely could not have happened without a support by the West. Unfortunately, some of the Muslim leaders and some of the Arab leaders accept this Zionist dream and oppose the Palestinian resistance. So now we are a kind of people who have no other way around but to remain steadfast against the great power of Israel, which is supported by its friends. So that is why we cannot rely but on our own resistance.
There's a big difference. The problem started inside Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Sheikh Jarrah. But we see that the real response came from Gaza, the Gaza Strip. This time around, we see a sense of unity among all Palestinian factions, political factions, and even different resistance groups. We see that the Islamic Jihad movement also responded and launched some airstrikes against Tel Aviv. We saw that the Hamas movement also responded by firing a barrage of rockets against the Israeli regime. So this time around, we see that different factions, political factions, and the resistance factions inside Palestine have been united against a single force. How do you think that this has helped to achieve this accomplishment?
نعم الشعب الفلسطيني
Yes.
مجزأ مقسما مقطعا ممزقا.
The Palestinian lands are divided by Israel.
بعثرته من أجل أن لا تكون له قائمة لكن كل مرة ينهض من تحت كل هذه الركام بطريقة
Every time Israel wants to go ahead and proceed with its Zionist policies, we try to stand against it. So what happened in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood was meant to, of course, acquire more lands and occupy more lands in Palestine on the part of the Israeli regime. But what happened in Sheikh Jarrah and Al-Aqsa Mosque caused the Palestinian people to rise once again. And it was a great insult to our rights. That is why we stood against it, and that caused a big explosion on the part of the Palestinian people to stand against any attempt to, of course, divide our people. So we have some third-class citizens, Palestinian citizens who of course live in Israel.
And the deadly clashes and then the resulting ceasefire as a game changer for both the Israeli regime and the Palestinian people, because what happened came against the backdrop of the deal of the century, Trump's deal of the century. Many view this as a last resort for Israelis to get ahead and go ahead with their occupation of Palestinian lands, despite the fact that they had pinned hope on the deal of the century. So many regard this as the last result against the backdrop of the deal of the centuries to extend the occupation, the Israeli occupation against Palestinians. How do you think about it?
Yes, the deal of the century was proposed by the Zionist regime. So Netanyahu was the person who forced the United States to come up with the deal of the century in order to erase our rights in Palestine. So throughout the different stages of the deal of the century, they tried to violate our rights by, of course, trying to deceive our people and some of the Arab countries into normalizations. But it was a failed project. They tried to force this deal of the century on the region, but this isn't impossible. The Palestinian cause is the utmost issue of the Muslim world and the Arab world as well. This cause is part of our dream, part of our history, and part of our land. It cannot be simply erased by such plans. This is what the Muslim world and the Arab leaders should understand. Unfortunately, some of the Arab people speak unintelligent remarks, and some of the Arab countries which house our Muslim sanctities speak such unwise words against our people and take very unwise steps against the Palestinian people. So that was the major reason why the deal of the century was proposed. As the Holy Quran says, they try to put out God's fire and God's light, but they cannot do it. If God wants us to emerge victorious. Nobody else with any plan can, of course, stand against God's decision. So this is our land, and this land is what is uniting all of us Palestinians. So there's been a governmental entity comprised of some of the countries, Western countries.
What do you think about the support offered to Palestinians? The Islamic Republic of Iran, as you also know, since the establishment of the Islamic Republic in 1979, Imam Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, announced designated a special day for the Palestinians as the Day of Al-Quds. And we have seen on several occasions that the Islamic Republic has showed support and solidarity with the Palestinian people. This time,
Iran is the only country in the world that supports our Palestinian right. It is a country that treaded on the right path towards achieving all of our goals. So Palestine is not Palestine is not for Palestinians only. Palestine is the issue of the entire Muslim world. But it is a holy place, not just for worshipping and housing holy sites, but it is holy because it is being violated and it is being occupied by an illegitimate regime. So they So Iran was a country that had the potential and had the option to, of course, normalize with Israel, but it didn't do this. It preferred to serve our interests, the Palestinian interests and the Palestinian cause. So all of the Muslim countries are unanimous that the Iranian people and the Islamic Republic stands with our people. And this is what needs to be understood by some of the Arab nations as well, and some of the Arab leaders as well. We belong to the entire Muslim world. So the entire Muslim communities need to join hands and save us from the occupation. The Islamic Republic is not taking an extremist stance, but it's a stance that pursues righteousness. Iran is a country that also supported the rights of the South African people. And in the year 1998, established ties with South Africa. And what is happening now, it is doing the same thing and taking the same stance with regards to the Palestinian cause. So it is offering its military and spiritual support to our people. So with all the facilities at its disposal, it tried to revive our rights and it tried to serve the interests of our people. And it tried to prevent the Palestinian cause from being forgotten by the world. and now offers any kind of support to anyone who tries to stand against occupation. All of the resistance movements inside and outside Palestine now enjoy support from the Islamic Republic of Iran, and all of these movements are united as a single resistance axis. So this Palestinian cause and the resistance movement are what unite us. Takes the side of the Palestinian people. And one of the big reasons why we emerged victorious was the support by the Islamic Republic. And the Iranian support was the major drive behind Palestinians to have the morale to go ahead and resist against the occupation. Some of the leaders tried to distort the reality, but Iran was the country that showed to the world what the real image of the Israeli-Palestinian. Major General Soleimani said, that the Palestinian cause is the number one and the most important issue of this century. And this is what a wise general advised people to also share such a stance. All of his endeavors, be it in Iraq or Syria, was meant to defend the rights of the Palestinian people at the end. So the Islamic it put its utmost issue and focused on the Palestinian cause and Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I believe that this resistance and this stance would be victor and would emerge victorious. We acknowledge the support by the Islamic Republic, and it's not a mistaken. It's not. Iran is not making a mistake by supporting the Palestinian people. Which everybody now in the world acknowledges that the Palestinian people supported need to be.
And thank you very much, Ustad Nasser Abu-Sharif,
acknowledged
of the Islamic Jihad movement. Thank you very much for watching us. See you next time.